Hello, Moxie. This is David Whitfield. I want to let you know that I am sending you the original video. I think it's important that you see how I would interact with clients as opposed to a edited or 7-take version of how I will interact with clients. So this is the real thing from the beginning. My process for speaker coaching is the same process I've used for all coaching. I observe, research, and then strategize. In the case of a speaker, I might want to observe them in person if possible, by video if necessary, and then of course discuss that with them. It is best to see them in a natural speaking situation so you can see the nuances and the things that they do that you could possibly work with to help them. Now, I do research because I'm not arrogant enough to think that I automatically know the answer to how to do everything better than everyone else or even better than they themselves do. So I like to research what they are like. I'm a big fan of the DISC personality profile, so that helps me kind of identify how they need to communicate, as well as if we can determine their audience, who their audience is, that is clearly a way to make sure that they are working in a way that's best to communicate to that audience. And last is strategize. When you strategize, of course, that's when you start bringing specific items, it's very basic eye contact to body language, etc., on the things that you can do. So again, my process is observation, research, and then strategize. So I would like to talk about some of the folks I've worked with. One of my most recent and interesting cases was a HR professional that I've worked with for years. She has a master's degree in HR, so one would assume that she has some idea of how to speak and communicate effectively with people. In this case, she came to me about her wedding. She was getting married in 6 months, and she was having a tremendous difficulty dealing with her mother and her maid of honor and the girl that was not her maid of honor. And so it was a real situation where you had to learn to communicate with each of those people in a way that would bring them together, because this is supposed to be a joyous time for everyone involved. And of course, it was not going that way. So what I did for her was I had her look at the situation from each person's point of view. And as she was able to understand what they were feeling and how they saw things, it made her able to respond in a way that was much more appropriate and much more accepted by each of the different people that she was dealing with. I attended that wedding about 2 weeks ago, and so far so good. The subject of diversity came up, not surprisingly in this day and age, but it came up in a very different way than it normally comes up, and from 2 different clients. The first is the international change manager for Air Liquide. He is an extremely highly educated African American. In addition to his college education, he's also a master black belt on Six Sigma. He is responsible for going all over the world and bringing the change that Air Liquide has mandated to all of the sub locations. This is further complicated by the fact that Air Liquide bought the second largest company of the same kind. So my friend Kenneth has to go in and try to manage change in a hostile environment as well as different cultures. So we worked out the opportunity to understand a couple of things. First, is there cultural differences that you have to be aware of when you're trying to communicate with someone? That's obviously critical on a one-on-one communication or from stage to audience. Secondly, we talked about, again, learning to understand things from the person's point of view that you're speaking to. So there are people that are always scared after a merger, especially when the change manager is coming in to their organization, to their office, to their section, and they're afraid of losing their job, their power, or any of the other many things that people tend to worry about. So when we talked about how to manage those fears by giving up the information ahead of time to first share exactly what's going to happen when he's there, what's trying to be accomplished, that took a lot of the fear out. And that was the key in Kenneth being able, that's the key to Kenneth being able to work better with those folks all over Europe. Secondly, another client is owner of a multi-route Snap-on business. So this was an old country Texas boy who started out on a truck selling tools and worked his way all the way up to having a multi-million-dollar business with 4 routes and employees. Now, this was great because he could work with the people that he hired, even though they were Hispanic and he's white, because he had a very good understanding of what they were doing. So that diversity was not a problem at all. The diversity that became a problem was he expanded into restaurants, specifically Fajita Pete's. Fajita Pete's is a new franchise, so they still have owner meetings where all the owners come together. Now, this good old Texas boy was perfectly at home with mechanics and with his workers, but in this situation, he was with college educated folks, people from higher echelons of the business, and he felt very uncomfortable speaking in front of these people. The problem being, the coaching that we did together had brought his sales up 30 to 40% over last year's sales since he took over the business. So the rest of the group wanted to hear what he was doing and how he was doing it. So this presented a problem that he was a little uncomfortable trying to speak to an audience that he considered higher than himself. So the first thing we discussed is there's no such thing as higher than yourself. It's simply differences. Maybe more highly educated or more socially adept, but the value that you bring is your knowledge and your understanding. And once he had that, and they wanted to know what he was doing. So that helped him get his confidence to the point where he could go in and speak to them as an equal and as someone sharing positive information that they could then use to increase their business. There was a gentleman that worked for Chick-fil-A, and he was a rather large gentleman, and as a coincidence, he also worked in HR, but he had always kind of used his size, his bulk, and his physical presence to kind of overwhelm any kind of dissent. As he progressed up the ladder and was dealing with other professionals, that was no longer enough. And so he was becoming very frustrated that he could not just kind of bully his way and get what he wanted. And so that was very challenging because someone who is dependent on their size or physical presence doesn't really want to give that up, as it's been their kind of security blanket for the whole of their life. So I went with him back to what is it that you want to accomplish? And once you can determine that you want to accomplish a compromise or a shared agreement or just sharing information, I said, can you do that with your size, your bulk, with your kind of intimidation? And clearly he understood that he could not. So that got him thinking about other ways to express himself. And we worked together with that on how to change his physical as well as his verbal communications to people that he was working with, his subordinates, and also, of course, his boss, which was getting a little fed up with the kind of negative energy that he was bringing to the work area. Victor Varma is a insurance brokerage, multiple offices. It's called Insure Us. He hated being on the phone. Well, that's fine, except that in the beginning, his business was almost 90% phone related. So we actually worked over several sessions on what you can accomplish over the phone. We started with some simple things as being accepting that this is the situation that you have to deal with, and being mad at it, arguing with it, or whatever does not change that. We talked about how smiling even on the phone, where they can't see you, they can almost feel the energy, and all of those kinds of things, specifics down to being prepared, having what he wanted to say written out. And so he became more at ease being on the phone. And from that time of a single person in a single office, now he has multiple offices and many people working for him. And he always reminds me of that session when we run into each other. I worked with Paula. She was the sales and membership director for the Sci-Fair Chamber of Commerce. And she was very excited and very knowledgeable about her information that she wanted to share with individuals and with groups. The problem she ran into is when it came time to get them to sign the document or time to close, she would reiterate everything that she was excited about. And of course, that drove people away because they just heard the information. And although in speaking, it's good to repeat yourself, in this situation, it just made them think that she was trying to fool them or just overwhelm them with information. So I very specifically told her when she goes over the information with a client or prospective client is to just check mark individual things that the client seemed most excited about. And then when she went to close or to bring the speaking engagement to a close, to hit on those things, stress the things that the person that you're trying to sell or trying to communicate with are most excited about. And in doing that, she was actually able to double her closing rate. And that was a few years ago, and now she is the vice president of the Sci-Fair Chamber of Commerce. So there was a definite ability to raise her position within the organization. For 7 years, I ran the networking committee called Referrals or Dynamic for the Sci-Fair Chamber of Commerce. And at the end of every weekly session, we had a phone training program, which was inspired by the gentleman that I spoke to you about just a few minutes ago. And in each of those, we would actually role play a phone call, and I would play the less than happy or less than helpful client. And what that was able to tease out individual people's issues and how they respond to things in a way that was comfortable because it was a nice, safe environment. But also, I could push hard enough to make them really have to dig deep and find out what they were trying to accomplish. And that was with so many different businesses. Again, it was over 7 years every week that we did this phone call role play, sales calls, complaint calls, even introductory calls. Something as simple as setting a meeting, having your exact idea of what you want to accomplish, when those meeting times are available, and giving those choices to people, allowing them to make a choice and not be just too open-ended. Were some of the most common things that people needed to work on. 2 years ago, we created a team to revamp the entire adult class ministry at my church. Because of my experience, they asked me to facilitate and run the connections portion, at which point we created leaders, class hosts, and how to have each of those people facilitate connections between everyone in the classes. Because to come in and learn a lesson is great, but what we really wanted to accomplish was to help build relationships. And so that fell on my team to create connection strategies that would encourage people to connect, to build relationships, and to get more out of their faith, their church, and everything of that. The Lead Exchange is a Texas-wide network exchange business. And I was brought on after giving many speeches at many of the chapters to create a certification program for speaking. It's a very basic level, talking about eye contact and body language and being prepared and all that sort of things, how much you need on PowerPoint if you want to use it. And that has become a certification process for Lead Exchange. My corporate training and development started with me creating my own ideas based on the methodology in my book, The 3 Rules for Breakthrough Success. I added to that the John Maxwell certification, and that opened up windows to all kinds of opportunities that I did not previously have. Just the John Maxwell name opened some doors, specifically in some of the religious areas, as well as some of the corporate areas. I'm going to include the catalog of all my courses I offer for leadership and development, in addition to the certification program I put together for speaking for the Lead Exchange. I hope this information is helpful, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you.